And then one day the American bombers, airplanes came and bombarded the village because they had got some information that there were communist guerrillas penetrating into the village. And the people in the village lost their home. And our workers took refuge in other places and sent word to us whether they should try to rebuild the village. And we said, yes, you have to rebuild the village. And then we spent another 6 months rebuild the village. And the village was destroyed by the bombing for the second time. Again, we lost our home. We had built many villages like that throughout the country. And this is a very hot place. This is near the DMZ, separating the north and the south. And then our workers asked us whether we had to rebuild it again for the third time. And after a lot of deliberation, we said that, well, yes, we have to rebuild it. And we rebuilt it for the third time. And you know something? It was destroyed for the third time by the American bombing. We were very close to despair. Very close to despair. You know the word despair? It's horrible, despair. Despair is the worst that can happen to a human being. And we rebuilt it for the third time. And then it was bombarded for the third time. And yet the same question was asked, should we rebuild? Should we give up? There was a lot of discussion at the headquarters. And we were tempted by the idea to give up. But 3 times is too much. Too much. But we were wise enough not to give up. Because if we give up the village of Talok, we give up something else, that is hope. We have to maintain hope in order not to fall into despair. That is why finally we decided to give the order to rebuild it for the 4th time. We had to resettle a lot of refugees, many resettle villages. I remember I was sitting in my office at the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Saigon. And many young people came to me and asked, Thầy, do you think that the war will end someday? Do we have any hope? Because the village of Talok is only just one place where the situation was very hard. People were dying every day. People were killing each other. Communist, anti-communist, involvement of Russia and China in the war, the involvement of Americans in the war. We got the ideologies, we got the weapons. We got advisors from China, from Russia. We got military personnel from America. And Vietnam became the victim of an international conflict, both weapon and ideology. And he wanted to end the war. But we could not end the war because the situation was not in our hand. It was in the hand of big powers. Thầy, do you think that we have any hope? Imagine I sit there, I was sitting there with 16, 18 young people asking me that question. It did not seem that there was hope because the war had been dragging on and on and on and on and on. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. And when I was asked that question, I had to practice mindful breathing and going back to my true home, the island of self. And finally, very calmly, I said, my dear friends, the Buddha said that everything is impermanent. Nothing can stay there forever. The war also is impermanent. The war should end sometime. Let us not lose our hope. And that's what I told them. There's not a lot of hope in me, I had to confess. But if I said that, I have no hope, and then I'll destroy all these 16 or 18 young people. So I had to practice in order to nourish a little hope in me so that I can be the refuge of these young people. We have gone through the fire, and we know how hot it is. I had a student who had graduated from the University of Bloomington in USA on English literature. She was ordained as a nun. And she was caught, she was arrested and put into prison. And you know something? In prison, she practiced walking meditation in her small cell. And don't think that the cell is only for herself. No, this is not Hilton Hotel. She had to sleep with several other women. Because she was working for peace against human rights, and that is why she was arrested in order to maintain herself, to keep her courage, so that she could survive. She had to practice walking meditation. She had been taught by myself how to walk, to be in the present moment, and to nourish herself, to nourish her hope. And she was able to help many people in prison. She even gave them the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts. And in such a situation like that, you can survive with your spiritual life. Otherwise, you get insane. You have no hope. You are frustrated. You get insane. You suffer much more. That is why the spiritual life, the spiritual dimension of your life is so important. If you are overwhelmed by anger, by despair, by fear, you suffer so much. You cannot help yourself. How can you help other people? And anger is fire. Fear is fire. Despair is fire. And suspicion is fire. It continues to burn you, and when you suffer so much from this kind of fire, how can you survive? And how can you help other people? So Sister Tihai was practicing walking meditation all night in order to not to get insane and to be herself. She went home to her true home. Her true home is within herself. Your true home is not in Paris, in London, in Jerusalem.